It started as a normal night in Kunming. People carried suitcases and children, scrolling through their phones, sipping tea from paper cups while waiting for the late train. The voice over the loudspeaker calmly announced departures, echoing through the vast hall of the station. Everything felt safe, ordinary, until the first scream tore through the air. Within seconds, chaos replaced calm. Shadows in black surged forward, blades flashing under the fluorescent lights. The sound of metal meeting flesh, of footsteps scattering, of pure, unfiltered terror. It all unfolded in less than a heartbeat. What happened that night at Kunming railway station was more than just an attack. It was a wake-up call, a reminder that danger can strike where safety feels absolute. This is the story of how a peaceful night turned into 30 minutes of unimaginable horror, and why you must listen till the end. Because what you learn here might one day save your life. March 1st, 2014. A quiet Saturday evening in Kunming, the capital of Yunnan Province, China. The city, often called the City of Eternal Spring, was peaceful as always, its train station filled with travelers returning home, students heading back to school, and families beginning their weekend journeys. No one could have predicted that this night would be remembered as one of the darkest in modern Chinese history. At around 8 p.m., as trains rumbled in and out, 8 figures dressed entirely in black entered the main hall of Kunming railway station. They moved with purpose, calm, silent, almost rehearsed. Moments later, the gleam of cold steel flashed beneath the fluorescent lights. Then came the screams. Within seconds, panic erupted. Passengers dropped their luggage, running in every direction as the attackers began slashing indiscriminately with long knives and machetes. When the assault finally ended, the floor was soaked in blood. 31 innocent people lay dead. 143 others were severely injured, some for life. The attackers, later identified as ethnic Uyghur extremists from Xinjiang, had chosen Kunming for a reason. It was far from their home province, a symbol of China's unity, and the last place anyone would expect such horror. Police forces arrived within minutes, confronting the assailants in a hail of gunfire. 4 attackers were shot dead on the spot. 1 woman was captured alive, and the remaining members fled, sparking a nationwide manhunt. The world would come to know this tragedy as the 2014 Kunming Knife Attack. China would call it something else, their own 9/11. It was not just a crime, it was a message. And for the thousands who were there that night, it was a memory carved forever into their flesh and minds. It was 7:59 p.m. when the first scream echoed through the Kunming railway station. Witnesses would later say it sounded like the cry of a wounded animal, sharp, brief, and followed by silence that lasted no more than a heartbeat. Then, chaos erupted. 8 figures dressed in black had appeared at the far end of the station, their faces covered with scarves. At first, passengers thought it was a fight, maybe a robbery, but the truth revealed itself in a flash of silver, a blade slicing through the air, followed by the wet sound of impact. The first victim, a middle-aged man holding a train ticket, collapsed before he could even turn around. The attackers moved quickly, efficiently, like soldiers trained for violence. They carried long knives, some nearly half a meter long, and swung them with terrifying precision. People screamed and scattered in every direction. Mothers clutched their children, students dove under benches, others froze in disbelief as the blades came down again and again. Security guards tried to intervene, armed with batons and nothing else. One of them, only 24 years old, charged at a female attacker, shouting for passengers to flee. He was cut down instantly. Blood sprayed across the tiled floor, painting the once sterile hall in shades of crimson. Surveillance cameras caught everything. 8 dark silhouettes advancing through the station, slashing at anyone in their path. They didn't shout. They didn't speak. Their silence was almost more horrifying than the screams around them. Within 3 minutes, dozens were on the ground. The air was filled with the smell of iron and fear. A young woman tried to pull her injured friend toward an exit, only to be struck across the back. She survived, barely, and would later tell police, voice trembling. They didn't look human. They looked like shadows that had come to kill. By 8:05 p.m., the emergency lines in Kunming were overwhelmed. The first responders had not yet arrived, and inside the station, the massacre was only beginning. By 8:06 p.m., the Kunming railway station had descended into pure madness. The echo of screams, footsteps, and cries for help blended into a single deafening roar. Suitcases were overturned, shoes left behind, phones scattered across the blood-slicked floor. The public announcement system kept repeating train schedules, a cruel contrast to the reality unfolding below. Witnesses described people sprinting toward every possible exit, only to find some doors locked. A woman in her 50s fainted beside a vending machine, her white blouse stained red. A young boy, no older than 10, cried out for his mother. No answer. Another passenger tried to drag him to safety, tripping over a fallen body in the process. At 8:08 p.m., a traffic officer stationed nearby rushed in, wielding only a baton. He swung once, twice, and was struck down by a blade across his chest. The attackers moved with chilling precision, spreading across the concourse to trap fleeing passengers. Panic turned into paralysis. People froze behind ticket counters and pillars, whispering prayers, waiting for the next scream. Calls flooded the local police command center. People are being stabbed at Kunming Station. Send help. Dozens of ambulances and armed units were dispatched, sirens wailing through the city. One witness, a student named Li Hua, recalled, "I saw a man trying to protect his wife. He held his arms out, and they cut him down. She was screaming his name when the police finally arrived." For nearly 10 unbearable minutes, the attackers ruled the station. Every slash, every step seemed deliberate, as if they were carrying out a mission rather than a rampage. And then, just as suddenly as it began, a new sound pierced the chaos. The thunder of boots and the command of armed officers shouting through loudspeakers, "Police, drop your weapons." The siege of Kunming had entered its second stage. At 8:15 p.m., the first convoy of armed police and paramilitary officers stormed into Kunming railway station. The sound of boots striking the marble floor echoed through the cavernous hall, mingling with cries for help and the fading hum of the loudspeakers. Officers raised their rifles, scanning the chaos through clouds of smoke and fear. The attackers were still there, 7 of them now, their black clothing drenched in blood. They didn't hesitate. One of the men charged toward the police line, knife raised high. Shots rang out. He dropped instantly. The rest scattered, slashing wildly, trying to reach the crowd again, but the officers moved in with precision, forming a defensive wall between the killers and the survivors. "Get down! Stay low!" an officer shouted as gunfire cracked through the terminal. Passengers crawled beneath benches and luggage carts, trembling.
The scene resembled a battlefield more than a train station.
In less than 5 minutes, 4 attackers were dead. A fifth, a young woman, was hit in the shoulder and collapsed near a pillar, her knife clattering to the ground. Officers surrounded her, shouting commands in Mandarin, then cuffed her as she bled onto the tiles. The rest managed to flee into the outer sections of the station, vanishing into the night. When the smoke cleared, the true horror became visible. Bodies lay scattered amid blood-stained luggage and shattered glass. One officer, his face pale, whispered into his radio, "We need more ambulances. Now." By 8:30 p.m., the station was under control. Armed police secured every exit, medics rushed in to tend to the wounded, and investigators began marking evidence. In the corner, the captured woman sat motionless, eyes distant, lips moving in a language no one nearby understood. Later, police would find the first real clues inside 2 black duffel bags near the ticket counter. Spare knives, travel maps, and a train itinerary leading toward the Laos border. This was not a random act of madness. It was a plan. By dawn on March 2nd, the station was sealed off like a war zone. Yellow tape marked the perimeter, blood trails were catalogued, and forensic teams in white suits moved silently through the wreckage. The air reeked of disinfectant and iron. Reporters gathered outside the barricades, their cameras clicking as officials delivered the first statement. This was an organized terrorist attack. Inside the command center, investigators pored over the security footage frame by frame. Every movement of the 8 attackers was mapped out. Their coordinated advance, their discipline, the precision of their strikes. These were not impulsive killers. They were soldiers on a mission. The captured suspect, a young woman later identified as Gulijire Abula, was interrogated under heavy guard at a nearby hospital. Her injuries were severe, but her silence more chilling. When she finally spoke, her words were fragmented, but clear enough. The group came from Xinjiang, more than 2,000 kilometers away, part of a separatist network seeking to bring fear to the Han people. Documents found in their bags revealed their route. They had traveled across China by bus and train, intending to cross into Laos. When security tightened along the border, they turned back toward Kunming. Facing capture, they decided to make their last stand by attacking civilians. Phones recovered from their belongings contained encrypted messages and photographs of weapons. One text, translated by police cyber units, read chillingly, "If we can't leave, we will make them remember us." By March 3rd, nationwide security alerts were raised to the highest level. SWAT teams and counterterrorism units tracked the remaining suspects through Yunnan's border towns. The more investigators uncovered, the clearer it became. This was not just an act of hatred. It was a statement, planned weeks in advance, executed with military precision. And the surviving woman? She held the key to understanding how it all began. By the morning of March 2nd, Kunming had fallen silent. The once bustling railway station was now a memorial ground. Rows of candles flickered beside pools of dried blood. Citizens came carrying white lilies, bowing their heads before hastily printed photos of the victims. Some wept openly. Others just stood in disbelief, trying to comprehend how their peaceful city had turned into a slaughterhouse overnight. Television broadcasts ran the same footage on loop. medics pushing stretchers, police escorting survivors, and the cold, grainy images from security cameras. 8 shadows, moving like ghosts through the crowd. The nation was stunned. Online hashtags spread across Weibo. #, pray for Kunming. #, never forget 31. People called it China's 9/11. Government officials visited the site, declaring a national moment of mourning. Meanwhile, hospitals overflowed with the wounded. Dozens of volunteers lined up to donate blood. Survivors shared their stories through trembling voices, tales of bravery, loss, and the sheer terror of those 30 minutes. I heard people crying for help, one nurse recalled, but I couldn't reach them fast enough. There was blood everywhere. It didn't look real. Foreign embassies issued statements condemning the violence, while global news outlets flashed headlines describing the deadliest mass stabbing in modern Chinese history. Around the world, questions arose. How could such an attack happen inside one of the most surveilled nations on Earth? In Kunming, fear lingered long after the bodies were taken away. Families refused to use the train for weeks. Shops near the station stayed closed. And in the evenings, as the city lights dimmed, you could still hear the echoes of that night. The whispers, the screams, the sound of knives slicing through air. But beneath the sorrow, a determination began to grow, to find every last person responsible. The hunt was far from over. The investigation moved swiftly. Within 48 hours, the Ministry of Public Security had launched a nationwide operation under the code name Thunder of March. Dozens of special units fanned out across Yunnan province, tracing the remaining attackers through bus routes, surveillance footage, and mobile signals. By March 4th, a breakthrough came. In the outskirts of Shilin County, 80 kilometers from Kunming, a farmhouse owner reported suspicious strangers asking for food and shelter. When police surrounded the area before dawn, they found the remaining members of the Kunming group. 3 men, exhausted, still armed. The confrontation was brief. 2 were shot dead after refusing to surrender. The last was captured alive. With that, the massacre's architects were all accounted for. Inside the interrogation rooms, the story unfolded piece by piece. The suspects were members of a Uyghur separatist faction that had splintered from a larger militant group in Xinjiang. They had been radicalized through online propaganda and foreign contacts. Their goal? To cause mass panic, demonstrate defiance, and inspire further attacks. When questioned, one of the captured men said coldly, "We were not trying to escape. We were trying to be remembered." It was a confession without remorse. Forensic analysts reconstructed the attack from over 200 video clips and eyewitness reports. Investigators identified the group's leader, a man named Abdulaziz Kurban, killed by police at the station. His fingerprints linked him to earlier separatist plots in Urumqi, proving that the Kunming Massacre had been months in the making. In June 2014, under the highest security, the Kunming Intermediate People's Court opened the trial of the 3 surviving attackers. 2 men and the wounded woman, Gulajire Abula. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, families of victims, and rows of armed guards. No cameras were allowed. The defendants sat silent as prosecutors detailed their crimes. Terrorism, intentional homicide, and attempted subversion of the state. Witnesses described the carnage. Survivors identified the attackers. Forensic experts presented the blood-stained knives, each labeled with DNA from multiple victims. The courtroom air grew heavy. When the verdict was read, no one made a sound. All three were found guilty on all counts. The two men were sentenced to death by firing squad. The woman, who had cooperated partially with the investigation, received a suspended death sentence, effectively life imprisonment. A mother of one victim later said outside the court, her face streaked with tears, "Justice is done, but nothing brings my son back." After the verdict, Beijing announced a sweeping anti-terror campaign across the nation. Security checkpoints multiplied in train stations and airports. Knives longer than 15 centimeters were banned from public transport. Officers were trained to identify signs of coordinated violence before it erupted. Still, the psychological wound remained. Many survivors never returned to the station again. Some struggled with nightmares for years. The smell of metal, the scream of strangers, the sight of red footprints fading across the floor. In a rare statement, one police officer who had been on the front line that night admitted, "We were trained for riots, not for that kind of evil." You can't unsee what we saw. Internationally, the Kunming attack drew both sympathy and scrutiny. Western governments condemned the violence, while human rights groups debated China's counterterrorism measures in its aftermath. Yet across all perspectives, one truth remained. Nothing could justify the slaughter of innocents. The trial concluded in silence. The city tried to heal. But in the memories of those who were there, the night of March 1st, 2014, would never end. In the years that followed, Kunming rebuilt. The railway station was cleaned, repainted, and reopened. But for those who survived, it never felt the same. Every announcement over the loudspeakers, every echo of footsteps at night, reminded them of that half hour when life and death blurred together. The 2014 Kunming knife attack was more than a tragedy. It was a scar carved into the soul of a nation. For 30 minutes, chaos stripped away the illusion of safety that people cling to every day.
It showed that terror doesn't always come with bombs or bullets.
Sometimes it hides behind an ordinary train ticket, a familiar voice, or the quiet hum of a waiting crowd. China responded with steel and vigilance. Metal detectors appeared at every station. Bags were searched, IDs scanned, security doubled. And yet, no matter how strong the walls became, the question remained. Can any society truly be safe from the darkness within its own people? The victims' names were never forgotten. Each year on March 1st, citizens of Kunming light candles at the station's plaza. The flicker of their flames dances across the marble, fragile but defiant. One survivor, a young woman who lost her brother that night, said in an interview years later, "They wanted to make us afraid, but we chose to live." That choice, to live, to remember, to keep moving forward, became Kunming's quiet victory. As the world grows more connected, so do the dangers that travel through it. Every traveler, every commuter, every bystander has a role to play. To stay alert, to look out for one another, and to never assume that safety is guaranteed. Because sometimes, evil walks among us, silently, patiently,
waiting for the moment when no one is watching. And when that moment comes, awareness can mean survival. Thank you for listening to Crimes That Shocked the World. Where are you listening from? At home, on the road, or on your way to work? Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what you felt while hearing this story, and what you think should change to keep people safe. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you'll never miss the next case that shakes the world and reminds us all that truth, no matter how dark, must always be told.